Leadership is hard, and I've got some good news and I've got some bad news for you. The bad news is that I can't make it any easier, but the good news is that we can work on it together to get better. And you want to know the secret? Who you are comes before what you do. It's form before function. So let's get to work together. I'm Preston Poore, and this is PQ. Today's guest has served our country as the U.S. Fire Administrator under President Obama and led the Atlanta Fire Department as its chief. His career is marked by a deep commitment to both public service and his Christian faith. After facing national controversy and losing his job for expressing his beliefs in a self-published book, he emerged as a leading advocate for religious liberty. Now, he's using his experience to inspire others, speaking across the country and continuing to stand for the freedom to live out one's faith. His book, Facing the Fire, chronicles his journey through these challenges and his unwavering courage. I had the privilege of meeting him at this year's Colson Conference, and I was truly inspired by his story, and I hope you are too. Please help me welcome Kelvin Cochran. Hey, Kelvin, how are you?
Good morning, Preston. I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. Thanks for being on the show and the episode this morning. As we go through this, I want to start, just as I always do, a little hot seat. So I'm going to ask you some fun questions to let the audience get to know you a little bit. And I might meander a little bit, take a rabbit trail, and ask you why you gave an answer or something like that. Sound good?
Let's go for it.
All right, here we go. So what do you prefer, texting or talking?
Talking.
Very good. I'm glad you're on here today then, right?
Yeah.
What's your favorite day of the week?
Fridays.
Friday. Well, why Friday?
Well, I get to celebrate the things I were able to accomplish in serving, of course, in my work at the end of the week, and look forward to a couple of days of intentional time focusing on family.
Very good. Love it. Hey, how about your favorite city in the U.S. beside the one you're living in right now?
Shreveport, Louisiana, my hometown, that really really laid the foundation for the person I am today.
That's good. We'll talk more about that here soon. Love to hear more. How about the nickname that your parents used to call you?
My mom did not have a nickname for me, but my grandmother did, and she used to call me Little Boy Blue.
Little Boy Blue? Why Little Boy Blue?
Well, that was a nursery rhyme. Preston, you may be too young to remember the nursery rhyme. Little Boy Blue, come blow your horn.
Okay.
And there's another part of it, but that's the part that I remember. But she named me. I guess she thought I was like Little Boy Blue in the nursery rhyme.
I love it. Okay, awesome, good. Hey, what's the last song that you listened to?
Well, I Trust in God.
Okay.
By Elevation Worship.
Oh, yeah, great group. Yeah. Okay, excellent. Let's see. So would you rather be able to speak in every language in the world or be able to talk to animals?
Wow. I'd rather be able to speak in every language of the world.
Would you?
Yes, because I love getting my points across to people from different countries and ethnicities. And it would have a meaning. It would have I guess a longer term impact than speaking to animals.
Yeah, I hear you. It would be interesting to know what was on their mind, though, wouldn't you think, from an animal perspective?
Cool. Yeah.
That'd be pretty cool, too. So I like them both. How about your favorite holiday?
Oh, wow, that's a tough one. I'd say it has to be Christmas. I've got lots of favorites, but if I just had to choose one, it would be Christmas. Of course, celebrating the birth of Christ, but then spending time with my family.
That's awesome. Yeah, Christmas is one of my favorites as well. As a matter of fact, I put a Christmas tree up starting on October 1st every year. I'm one of those people.
Wow. And I thought I was early, putting mine up the day after Thanksgiving.
Well, there you go. Okay, good. Hey, just a few more for you here. How long does it take you to get ready? Like in the morning, how long does it take you to get ready?
About 30 minutes.
Okay, that's really good.
Yeah.
How about on a scale of 1 to 10? How good of a driver are you? Scale of 1 to 10.
I'd say 8.
Okay. How about, here's a good one. Fill in the blank. Taylor Swift is?
A pop culture icon.
There you go. Love it. What age do you want to retire?
I don't ever want to retire.
Good. And why do you say that?
Because I don't believe retirement is a kingdom construct. There's a scripture that says, and he shall still bring forth fruit in old age, he shall be fat and flourishing. And the fat that you're talking about there, Preston, is not obesity. It's just talking about, wholesome and still productive and still accomplishing things and bringing forth good results.
Love it.
And so
Okay,
I
excellent.
think, in American culture, retirement is almost like the end of a journey where you can start gearing down and scaling back. And I just don't see anywhere in the Bible where there's any standards or precepts for gearing down and scaling back.
That's good. It's funny. I'll go off a rabbit trail real quick with you. I was at a meeting a couple years ago, and I was getting close to retiring from the Coca-Cola company. And there was somebody else there that they were celebrating for retirement, and a video came on the screen. And the leader that had gone before from the Coke system filmed a video for this other gentleman. And in the video, he said, "You know what my days are filled with? Honeydews and drinking beer at 5 o'clock." And I shook my head and I said, "Man, that's not what I want."
No.
And because I'm of the same thought process as you are, that even though we might move and change chapters in
Right.
life, we still have a lot to contribute and do. And so I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on
Yes,
that later
sir.
on here. Hey, two more. Invisibility or super strength? If you were a superhero, would you rather be invisible or have super strength like Superman?
Strength. The
Strength.
things I want to do, I want people to be able to see.
Yeah.
See me in the act of doing it.
That's good. I love it. And then last one, this is an either or on it. Actually, no, it's a little bit different. Is it wrong for a vegetarian to eat animal crackers?
Well, I think so.
You like that one? That one, every time I ask that question, people get a laugh or a giggle out of that one. So I have fun with that. Hey, so let's transition our conversation. Thank you for investing time in the hot seat, and I hope our listeners enjoy getting to know a little bit of the nuances about you and your the fun things. It's January 6th, 2015. Take me to that day. Tell me what happened. What was on your mind, your heart, your soul, and share with our listeners what was going on that specific day.
I'd have to start 30 days prior to that, where I was called into the office of the Director of Human Resources and told them that I was going to be suspended for 30 days for writing a book for a Christian men's Bible study, where just a few pages of the book spoke about biblical marriage and biblical sexuality. And the investigation was going to be to determine whether my views on biblical marriage and biblical sexuality caused me to discriminate against anyone who didn't embrace those views. At the end of that 30-day investigation, the media started off expressing that there was no evidence that I'd ever used my views to discriminate against anyone. However, I was going to be terminated anyway. So it was announced that I would no longer be employed as fire chief of the city of Atlanta. And I was completely surprised by that, because I was confident that if their motive for the investigation was true, that I was going to be completely exonerated. And they affirmed that it was true, that I had not discriminated against anyone based on those views. And in fact, the investigation revealed that many people that they interviewed who felt that they may have been subject to consequences for believing different, those people said that I was one of the most fairest fire chiefs that they have ever worked with. But they also indicated, since they know how I believe, they don't feel comfortable working for me anymore, now that they know what I believe about marriage and sexuality. So I think by and large, it was for political reasons that I was terminated after 34 years of faithful service in the fire and emergency services.
So that January 6th, you get the news about just that termination on that. What went through your mind? What were your emotions? Because you're in this cauldron now, right? Where that's I guess a crucible for you at that time frame. Tell me about that.
Yeah, how some people, when they have a near-death experience, they say, and they survive it, they would say often that their life flashed before their eyes. Well, being fired is not close to a near-death experience, Preston, but my life flashed before my eyes. And what happened was I had a flashback of how God had been faithful in my life, from childhood experiences to young adult experiences to the early developmental years of my marriage and family, the early years of the fire service, how I had experienced significant challenges, troubles, and tests and tribulations throughout my life, and that God had delivered me from them all. I experienced that in a moment, and it gave me this tremendous peace and confidence that God was with me in that moment. And one of my favorite scriptures rose up from Psalm 112. It says, "And he shall not be afraid when he hears bad news. His heart is fixed. Trust in the Lord." And so that's what I was experiencing in that moment.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. So tell me a little bit then, because I want to talk about that day forward. Then I want to go back and learn a little bit about the formation of your character and some of those experiences you had. You mentioned about that. So tell me what from that day forward, what happened from there?
Well, a couple of weeks prior to that, I had met a Christian law firm called Alliance Defending Freedom. They met with me and asked if I would like legal representation after my 30-day suspension. I confidently shared with them I didn't think I was going to need it because I was so confident that I would be exonerated and put back to work. I said, essentially, thanks, but no thanks. And they shared with me that just in case, let me just tell you who we are and what we do. And if should you need us, if you're not put back to work and exonerated, we'll be honored to support you. So immediately when I found out I was terminated, I thought about Alliance Defending Freedom, that's a Christian law firm. And they began to represent me legally and walk me through what would ultimately be a 4-year legal journey, where they not only provided godly Christian legal representation, but the care and nurture they provided to me and my family. That 4-year period was just incredible. And we never had to pay 1 cent for the legal services because ADF is supported by tremendous, generous ministry friends to do what they do. So I was cared for legally, professionally ministered to. Thank God I was a member of Elizabeth Baptist Church and very active in my church. So I had a pastor and a whole congregation that rallied behind me to support me. Our church was a part of the Southern Baptist Convention. So Preston, I had the support of the entire Southern Baptist Convention, who very deliberately supported and encouraged me throughout that entire legal journey.
That's so important when we get and we face adversity that we have community around us. Tell me a little bit about the impact. What would have happened if you didn't have that community?
Well, without community, I would have felt that I was alone, and that there would have been no one to encourage me and my wife and my children. But thank God that was not the case. There was never a moment that I felt I had to go through it alone. And so many scriptures, of course, rose up in me that I began to see come to play in my life. One is his yoke is easy and his burden is light. And in that moment, Preston, I realized that what I was going through I was not being punished by God. It was a fiery trial that God had allowed to come into my life for his glory, and that it was his yoke, and his yoke is easy, his burden is light. And that's important when believers are going through fiery trials like that, because we don't have to carry the weight. When Jesus said it's his yoke, and his yoke is easy and light, it should give us confidence and peace knowing that he's carrying the weight. And that's what I experienced.
That's awesome. So inside of all of that, because you mentioned not fearing in a scripture reference earlier on our conversation here, tell me about fear. And I know your story is one of courage, right? Because I've often tell people that courage isn't the absence of fear, but it's acting in the middle of it, in the midst of it, right? So it's not that fear's gone and I've got this bravery now that I can do something. It's still acting in the midst of it. Did you find the same? Tell me about those two words to you and how you faced that.
Well, what I've discovered is, being a firefighter for 34 years, there are many opportunities to face fear. And fear, it has to be taken on. There's a godly, well, let me say it this way, Preston. God appropriates courage consistent with our purpose and consistent with our calling. When I use the word purpose in this context, God appropriates courage to us consistent with our roles in family relationship. It takes courage to be a husband. It takes courage to be a dad. It takes courage to be a brother or a sister, or, it just takes courage to do family relationships. And God appropriates courage in the moment when courage is needed in family relationships. But God also appropriates courage within our calling. Of course, my first job wasn't a firefighter. I had a paper route in Shreveport, Louisiana, where I had to get up early in the morning in the dark and throw the Shreveport Times. I mean, riding on my bicycle in the dark, it was scary. But God appropriated the courage I needed to do that job. Or what I learned, Preston, is God always appropriates courage consistent with the calling he has on our lives. People always wonder, will I have enough courage to do this or that in the moment? And it's a good question, but the answer, based on God's track record, is yes. Because if what you're doing is an assignment from God, he will appropriate the courage that you need to stand. We just have to do that part. We just have to stand.
So good. Thank you for that. Hey, let's go back. So where this all started, you mentioned the paper route, right? Love to hear about your career progression, the steps you took before you came to Atlanta, and then also love to hear a little bit about your work with the Obama administration.
Yeah, thank you, Preston. I've learned that every job I've ever had has been predestined by God. It was a divine assignment, that every job prepared me for the next one, in some ways great, in some ways small. And so to walk you through that bio, that my first job was a paper boy. My second job was a cook at Arthur Treacher's Fish and Chips. And then after Arthur Treacher's Fish and Chips, I had the divine assignment of being a cook at Catfish Kitchen. And after Catfish Kitchen, El Chico's Mexican restaurant. After El Chico's,
you liked food, Kelvin. It sounds like.
I was a foodie.
Right? So,
and it came in handy when I became a firefighter in 1981, because firefighters had to cook meals, and I was one of the guys who helped cook the meals. So God used those previous jobs to help prepare me for that. And after becoming a firefighter, in 4 years, I became a captain. It usually takes 12 to 15 years. After 10 years on the department, I was an assistant chief.
Let's pause there for just a second. Why? Why did your career over 4 years, you got into a role versus the 12? There's got to be some character formation, something that showed about you that allowed you to assume a leadership role like that. What was that?
Yeah, well, while I was going through the recruit academy, the training officers were just such professional, sharp, brilliant thinkers. They had this tremendous persona, this image. They wore their uniforms just pristine. They knew the job. And I determined before I graduated, I want to be like one of them when I grow up. And so it was 4 years into my career where there was a tragedy that occurred in our city. A cold storage plant exploded. 2 training officers were in the building when it happened. One of them was killed, Percy Johnson, and the second one was badly injured, Patrick Johnson. They were not related. Patrick Johnson was white. Percy Johnson was black. And because of the death of Percy Johnson and the ultimate retirement of Patrick Johnson due to his injuries, there were vacancies in the training center. And I applied for one of those promotions and was actually the one who filled the position of Patrick Johnson, the training officer. Here's a crazy thing. Patrick Johnson is the father of the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. They live right across the street from the training academy. And Mike Johnson used to come over to the training academy all the time to visit his dad. So I saw him growing up. Mike Johnson actually ended up being an attorney for Alliance Defending Freedom.
So character formation. Tell me a little bit about your character formation. Again, this form before function. So you mentioned that, divine appointments, intervention, your path. God puts you in certain locations, positions, people to develop those things. Tell me a little bit about your character development path as you went through that.
Yeah, it started early in my life. I remember growing up in Shreveport, Louisiana in the early 60s. It was tough in the South, growing up as an African American in that era. Poverty was a terrible thing. In addition to that, my father left my mother. There were 6 of us, 4 boys and 2 girls, and he left my mom. We were poor when he was with us, but things got a lot worse after he left, and we were evicted from the government projects we were living in. And we moved a few blocks over to a shotgun house in a back alley called Rear Snow Street. And I realized how difficult it was for our mom to raise 6 children all by herself on the income of a dry cleaner that she worked. And but we also joined the Galilee Baptist Church at the top of the alley. A year or so after that, I confessed Christ and was saved. And was going to church, or anytime the doors were open, we were in the church. And I began to see and notice men who were married and had children. And I was just so drawn to those families and realized that's the kind of family that God intended. A husband, a wife, and children. And they were so much happier than we were. They were nicer dressed than we were. And they just seemed to have a lot more than we had. Miss Maddie, a lady who lived across the alley from us, one day her house caught on fire. And my brothers and sisters and I heard sirens in our alley. We sprang to our feet, opened the front door, and right in front of our house was a big red Shreveport Fire Department fire truck. Miss Maddie's house was blazing. Thank God she was out. But when I saw the firefighters get off the truck and take the hose into Miss Maddie's house, I was smitten on that day. So 3 things to kind of summarize this long-winded answer that stood out to me and influenced me was that I wanted a family like those men I saw at the Galilee Baptist Church. I did not want to be poor, and I wanted to be a firefighter when I grew up. So grown-ups ask us all the time, here's where the values come in. Grown-ups ask us all the time, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I was ready with my 3 answers, Preston. I would always say, I don't want to be poor. I want a family, and I want to be a fireman. They didn't call them firefighters back in those days. They called them firemen because only men were eligible to be firefighters. And so their response to my answers would be consistently the same. They said, in our country, you can be anything you want it to be if you believe in and have faith in God. If you go to school and get a good education, they would always say good education. If you respect grown-ups and treat other people like you want it to be treated, they said, all your dreams are going to come true. Now, I was raised on faith and patriotism, and those were the values that shaped my little heart at 5 years old on the front porch of a shotgun house in Shreveport, Louisiana. And I've carried those values with me. They blessed me and benefited me my entire life.
So, Kelvin, if I'm sure you've had mentors in your life, you're probably mentoring other people, but for the people that are listening, really for emerging leaders, if you were sitting across one-on-one with somebody that's an aspiring and emerging leader, what would you say to them? What would be a lesson from your life that you want to pass on to them that you've learned, that you've taken away?
Well, I would encourage, first of all, if you have a relationship with Jesus Christ, it's really the foundation of everything I'm going to say, because we have been predestined by God to a purpose and to a calling. Our purpose is we are sons and daughters of God. God created us because he wanted a family. And what I've learned, Preston, is when we're faithful to God in fulfilling our roles and responsibilities in family relationships, then God will reveal to us the calling that he has for our life. There's not a case in the scripture where God gave a divine assignment to a man or a woman who was not faithful in a family relationship. And so when you know what you're doing is a calling, then you should walk in that calling. So I would encourage up and coming leaders. The first thing is never accept an assignment that conflicts with your calling, because you're not going to thrive. But when we find an organization that is aligned with our calling, then we can live out our values without compromising them within the context of our work. So when your organization's values align with your personal values, it's just a matter of being committed to the vision, mission, and organizational values, following the rules, regulations, policies, and procedures faithfully, and having a sincere desire to see other people succeed. It will set you apart from other team members and position you for advancement when the opportunity comes along. And I've learned that success is where preparation meets opportunity. And so when you have that level of commitment that you demonstrate every day, you are in a steady state of preparation. So when the opportunity comes along, you stand out.
That's so good, so rich in advice and wisdom. Thank you for that. Let me ask a tough question. How does somebody find their calling?
It starts with an abiding relationship with God. When we abide in him, the Bible says he abides in us. And it also goes in the same chapter, John chapter 15, if we abide in him and his word abiding in us, then we'll bring forth much fruit. And so when a person is searching for, what did God create me to do? When you spend constant time in the presence of God and in the word of God, God reveals to us what he created us to do. I'd like to use David as a good example for that. David was the youngest of 7 boys. And the worst job was given to the youngest boy, which is tending to the herd. He faithfully did that job. And he was spending time with God. David knew that shepherding was a divine assignment. You can look at the book of Psalms and what he wrote and know that that boy was spending time with God when he was out there shepherding. And so it's another good example of David, that God appropriates courage consistent with our calling. Because David, when he was facing Goliath, he remembered, he said, a lion came out to attack the sheep and a bear, and I killed them. So God appropriates courage consistent with our calling. But when we're faithful in our purpose, and God reveals to us our calling. And as long as we continue to do that, then we're going to continue to advance from one divine assignment to another divine assignment. And here's another biblical example. Moses was 80 when he was given his calling, his divine assignment. Why did it take 80 years? Because Moses he didn't start off with a life that was surrendered to God. The first 40 years of his life, he was living as an Egyptian, living according to their ways. He was a bachelor, he wasn't married. But after he was exiled, after killing the Egyptian, he met a godly man, married a godly woman, has 2 boys, and once he proved he could do the assignment that Jethro gave him, then God says, I've got an assignment for you. Go get my people out of Egypt. So God reveals to us our calling when we are faithful to him through abiding and when we are faithful in family relationships. I would go so far as to say, Preston, that if anyone listening is struggling as to when is God going to reveal to me my calling, you got to do an assessment of how am I abiding in God? Do I have an abiding lifestyle? And am I faithful in family relationships? And if you don't have an abiding lifestyle, and if you've got family relationships that you're not nurturing, God is intentionally withholding from you your calling because he cannot trust you to do it for his glory.
That's so good. Thank you, Kelvin. I appreciate that wisdom and sharing that as well. It's that idea that I tell people about is the form before function, right? So Moses, David, their hearts, the things they did, they were their formation of the character, the experiences they had. And then when God called them into their next phase of their life, the next chapter, the next thing he wanted them to do for his purpose, they stepped into that.
Yes.
Right. And again, I'm sure there was some fear involved, but there was also courage. And it was courage in not only what they were going to do, but who was helping them and put them there. So wonderful, wonderful example. So thank you for that. And the reason I ask you that question is I know there's probably a lot of emerging leaders right now thinking, where do I find my calling? How do I hear that all the time, but how do I get there? And you provided a fantastic answer on that. Hey, a couple of things before we close out here. Tell me a little bit about what you're doing now.
Well, currently I'm on staff at Alliance Defending Freedom. I serve as senior fellow and vice president there. My official day-to-day duties is providing pastoral and spiritual care to our team members. Alliance Defending Freedom is about 460 team members strong. We're in 7 countries, of course, the United States and 6 other countries. We have offices in Scottsdale, Arizona, Washington, D.C., Lansdowne, Virginia, and Lawrenceville, Georgia. And our team members are required to be Christian, but all of them are, for the most part, members of local churches. Some of them may be in between churches for one reason or another. But because of the nature of what we do, our current CEO and general counsel, Kristen Wagner, wanted our team to have access to in-house pastoral and spiritual care. And I'm blessed and privileged to serve in that role.
That's awesome. And then I also, when I met you at the Colson Center, the conference in Dallas this year, you also are part of the Colson organization, the Colson Center. Is that correct?
Yes, I serve on the board of directors for the Colson Center, and I'm currently going through the Colson Fellows program at the Colson Center and just having a fantastic experience with that.
Good. Enjoy that. I got commissioned last May for that. So I know you're probably reading a lot, watching a lot of videos and doing the cohorts on that. So
yes,
awesome stuff. Hey, and then one other thing I was really curious about, and then we'll wrap and see if you have any closing comments. Tell me about President Obama and your interactions with him.
Well, of course, the United States Fire Administrator was a presidential appointment, Senate confirmation position. So it was just a very grueling process to get to that. Many listeners probably want to know, well, how does that come about? It's not a job where you put in an application and you get recruited and selected. It's I was at my office in Atlanta serving as fire chief there when he was elected, and someone from the White House called and said, President Obama wants to appoint a sitting fire chief to the head of the United States Fire Administration. If he offered you the position, would you take it? And I discovered
you said
that
no.
They offered that way because they don't want it to be said that someone turned the president down. So they want to know if you'll take it first before
That's
they
right.
offer it. And so I eventually I told them yes, I would take it. But I did not get to actually meet him directly because I only served there for 1 year before I was recruited back to Atlanta. And that's a story in and of itself, Preston, because while I was gone, my position was never filled. There was an interim in that position because there was a transition of mayors. There was an election going on. And the mayor that was elected wanted me to come back. And so he recruited me to come back. And so I went back. I'd served him for 5 years, and he's the guy that fired me for writing a book for Christian Men's Bible Study.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So that's now I'm getting the full circle picture on and how
But
that
I
worked.
loved serving as the United States Fire Administration. I was over the training program for the entire country at the National Fire Academy. I was responsible for emergency preparedness and response for the fire service, the entire nation. I was a liaison between the president and all professional fire associations in the country. And it was a wonderful experience.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing. Hey, as we wrap up today, I always like to ask at the end of these discussions is what would be one takeaway? We took I took you down the path of sharing some leadership thoughts, but as you walk away from our conversation, what would you share with our audience today to think about? What would you leave them with?
Well, as it relates to our faith, we're living in a time where there are high risk for being openly Christian today. And I would encourage us that we are the generation that God has raised up to stand and to have courage and to boldly live our faith, even though the risks are great. There's 5 things that I've learned going through my experience that I want to share. The first one is God always prepares us for persecution. If we're going to experience persecution for living out our faith, a Christian needs to know that God has prepared me for it. We wouldn't be going through it if God had not determined that he had prepared us for it. The second thing is there are worldly consequences for standing on biblical truth and standing for Christ. Preston, we have to face the truth of that and not avoid that truth. There are worldly consequences for standing on biblical truth and standing for Christ. Where we face that on the front end before it happens, when it happens, we're more likely to walk in faith and courage rather than to walk in fear. The third thing is there are kingdom consequences for standing on biblical truth and standing for Christ. And the kingdom consequences are always greater than the worldly consequences. They always are. The fourth thing I've learned is that God is glorified when we have the courage to stand on biblical truth. 2 things happen. Our enemies get to see a side of God that they would have not seen, and we get to see a side of God that we would have never seen. And then the 5th lesson I've learned is for sons and daughters of God who have the courage to stand, according to the scripture, our life of blessing goes to a whole nother level because we have the courage and grace to stand. Every time a son or a daughter of God in the Bible stood on faith, stood with courage, their life advanced to a whole nother level. Job was restored twice as much as he had. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were promoted to governors. Joseph became the prime minister after all of his persecution. David became the king of Israel after his 7 years of being on the run from Saul. Jesus has the name above every name because of the suffering that he endures. So when we have courage to stand, our life of blessing goes to a whole nother level. I'm living proof of that. My life today is exceeding abundantly above all I could have ever dreamed our daughter has because of what I had endured and doing it for the glory of God.
That is awesome. Incredible. 5 points. You know, it's funny. Your message is consistent because I think those are the same 5 that you shared when I heard you speak at the Colson
Yes, sir.
conference. I can see myself still sitting in the audience writing those down.
Yes,
I still
sir.
have them in my book. So thank you for resharing those and being consistent in what it is. Kelvin, you're a light and you are an awesome individual, a role model. I thank you so much on behalf of believers for an example of what it's like to stand in the midst of adversity and the results that come from that and who you are. And I appreciate that. Thanks for showing up today and appearing on our episode. Appreciate you.
Well, to God be the glory, Preston. Thank you for the opportunity.
Hey, what a great episode with Kelvin Cochran. Appreciate him being on, sharing his story. If you want to hear more, learn more about me and connect with me on LinkedIn. And I'd love to hear a message from you, something you learned from Kelvin, your takeaway, and start a dialogue with you. Tune in next time to P Cubed. This is Preston Poore signing off. Take care.